Now, according to SweepSouth's 7th annual report on domestic worker pay and work conditions, 83% of domestic workers are the primary breadwinners for their households, supporting an average of 4 dependents. And while inflation is easing slowly with the anticipation of interest rate cuts, the cost of living has risen by 15% for domestic workers over the last year, while most are being let go due to employer affordability issues. Joining us as we explore the economic struggles of local domestic workers as we navigate the report in greater detail is Lourandi Kriel, who's a CEO of SweepSouth. Lourandi, thank you for your time. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for chatting to us. Maybe before we, get into the nitties of the survey here, we can just take stock of who the domestic worker in South Africa is. It is made up of, a certain age bracket, maybe even the various nationalities, because it is colorful in that regard as well. Lourandi, just give us more information about that.
Okay, so the domestic workers in South Africa are majority female, about 92% female. They are 67% single mothers. 83% of them are breadwinners, and then we see in our survey data most of them are between the ages of 24 and 41. And their nationality mostly Zimbabwean, followed close by South Africans.
And then let's also touch on how much they're getting paid here. This is very important, and also where it measures, Lourandi, compared to minimum wage, because of course we have laws regulating that, and also other regulations that, looking at things like the bread line, for instance, other important numbers like that.
Okay, yes. So the minimum wage is dictated obviously by government, and government has done great work year on year to increase that minimum wage by 8.5%. We see that domestic workers have increased earnings of 5% year on year, but it doesn't cover the 15% increase in living cost. On the SweepSouth platform, our domestic workers earn about 54% above the average in the market, and 46% of domestic workers still earn below that minimum wage a number that is stated by government.
Very interesting indeed. Now I want to get into some of the nitties here, just with regards to what we're seeing in terms of the conditions. I think it's an important one there. And I think when I was going through the report, I saw also issues around abuse and mental health. And I think these are also important to highlight, specifically because domestic workers work in spaces that people deem to be private, except these are places of employment for them.
Yes, so unfortunately, the report has pointed out to us that 16% of the domestic workforce have shown a decline in mental health. And the reasons they state for that is, stress of being unemployed, financial stresses and family stresses. And then there are still, unfortunately, some domestic workers that works in environments where the households are either verbally abusive to them, and in some cases, even low statistic but totally unacceptable, physical or sexual abuse.
That is, I think, a rather scary one here, Yolanda. And I must then ask you here, Lourandi, about protection. I think it's an important one as well. What is the process, I guess, that domestic workers have for protection? And the reason I ask for this is because a lot of the time, we know, for instance, the law says a contract must be in place. There's no contract, and so it also becomes very difficult for the Department of Employment and Labour to come into households to regulate working conditions and the likes. It really means that domestic workers, by very nature, are a precarious workforce.
Yes, and a complex matter to unpack. We work with government, and we really support all the initiatives government has put in place to narrow the gap between minimum wage for domestic workers versus the normal minimum wage. But enforcement still remains a key issue and key priority. We feel that government should make it easier. I mean, the initiative government has put in place, like to register your domestic worker for UIF, have a proper contract in place, treat them like you would treat any other employee that needs leave, needs sick leave, paid leave and paid sick leave. That's all great, but we need easier ways to navigate that and to comply. I think that, and I'd like to believe as South Africans, we want to do the right thing, but if it's hard for us to do that, we often, do what we used to do. On our platform, the domestic workers it's a marketplace platform, so they remain independent contractors, but we have mechanisms in place to ensure that they have dignified work opportunities, and that the homes that they do go into are places where they want to work, through them rating customers and giving us feedback around the homes they go to and they don't want to return necessarily.
I'm also very interested to find out here. Also, I think you mentioned that a majority of the domestic workers in South Africa are Zimbabwean, and I'm wondering if the issue of them being foreign nationals doesn't also lead to just more precariousness. If we think of how it's worked in terms of permits, I know I've heard of the issue of permits, taking long. That can also lead to certain kinds of abuses and vulnerabilities that a South African may not encounter here. Also showing here, Lourandi, that the system in which domestic workers operate in isn't necessarily completely supportive of the kinds of work that they do and the vulnerabilities that they face.
Yes, in terms of permits and work visas, at SweepSouth, we believe it has to be in place. We do not onboard workers onto our platform if all these, call it legalities, are not in place. So we do check for that, along with, criminal checks and criminal verifications. But the domestic workers surveyed in this survey is not 100% just from our platform. Only a third of the respondents are registered on our platform. So I would assume and believe that you hear these stories and they are prey to some legislation not allowing them to get the right documentation in time. And I think if you're a foreign national, you don't necessarily know where to go. What is positive, and I want to just stand on that, is that the majority of the domestic workers that move on beyond domestic work are South African nationals. And they then report 70%, over 70%, they get treated much better when they move beyond domestic work. So they kind of use it as a springboard to save for something else.
Well, thank you so much for this data, Lourandi. It's all we have time for today, and I think definitely giving us a very interesting insights here this afternoon, bringing important awareness. That was Lourandi Kriel, CEO at SweepSouth.